We are moving on to our case study, our progressive campaign case study. And I want to break this down in such a way. We're going to talk about the past and we're going to talk about the present and a little brief like glimpse into the future, so to speak. I've done little case studies on this show before. This one, I think, is probably going to go pretty deep because there's so much to show you. But I want to give a shout out to Do Dissidents because it was actually their video that made me say, you know what? There are some things we need to show people. So I want to start with that. We're going to talk about why the progressive campaign strategy is problematic, why it's not working. This case study is not to shame people. I want to make that very clear because I want people to be like, so-and-so, Sabby roasted so-and-so. That's not what this is about. This is to show you where we came from and why we have what we have today. And you have to understand that there is strategy. There's different types of strategy that you can do. But you have to understand why this particular strategy has pretty much split people on the left. And there's different elements that we're going to talk about here. And then you're going to understand, I'm going to explain to you the problem that people seem to have with Jimmy Dore splitting from that strategy. I'm going to explain, it's all going to make sense when we get done. But you also have to understand why some people are still pushing it. I want to say again, this is not to shame anybody, but I want to show you why we are where we are today and what could possibly happen for the future. So I want to start with this video here. It's a clip from Do Dissidents, and it says, progressive media desperate to recreate Bernie magic with Marianne 2024. Let's get started here because this actually starts the case study. And I'll chime in here and there, and then we're going to go to some other clips.
Progressive indie media ecosystem owes its existence pretty much to the Democratic primaries of 2016. Right? The Bernie Sanders campaign served as a red pill moment for progressive Democrats who all of a sudden, for the first time, saw their own party's true colors. And that just happened to happen as the podcast and YouTube world was becoming more mainstream and accessible to mass audiences. So it was really a perfect storm for podcasters and YouTubers. Now, the Bernie versus Hillary saga, in addition to providing this endless supply of emotionally charged content, also served as a sort of built-in narrative arc for shows like The Young Turks and Secular Talk, The Humanist Report, and others. And just as most successful TV series contain episodic stories within a sort of overarching plot, these lefty online programs covered each and every development of that campaign, the debates, the conventions, right, everything, as part of a larger story unfolding in real time, which of course ensured that their audience would keep coming back for more.
Let's pause there for just a second. Let's all remember, let's go back to Bernie 2016. These shows really grew significantly from the Bernie Sanders campaigns. And it just so happened that Bernie ran twice in a row. Now, that is not to shame these people. I want to make that very clear. But you have to understand why they're doing what they're doing today based on what happened before. This doesn't mean that they don't believe in the progressive strategy. It doesn't mean that they don't still want to like fight inside the Democratic Party. But what it does show you is that during those two Bernie campaigns, these platforms grew quickly. And I don't mean you have 10,000 subs and then a year later you have 20,000. I mean, these platforms were able to grow to the point where they had over 100,000 subscribers within a year. I've talked to people that were a part of these shows that have explained this to me, how this worked. So it was that Bernie campaign twice in a row that really helped a lot of people find them. That's how I found some of them, to be honest. But then something happened. Let's go on.
And even as the primary ended, after the primary ended, these online creators were then further blessed with a very darkly comic and eventful general election between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, followed by, of course, a Trump victory and then the Trump presidency, and then again, of course, by a second Bernie Sanders run. Now, since the election of Joe Biden, however, this progressive media hustle has become a far greater challenge than it ever was before. Now, this, to be clear, is not for a lack of material. From the Build Back Better debacle, the Russia-Ukraine war, Twitter files, the Republican forced to vote throwdown, and most recently, obviously, the disaster in East Palestine, Ohio. All of these events have given content creators an opportunity to sink their teeth into important and consequential stories and provide a sort of alternative indie media perspective.
But even those stories don't help you grow quickly the way that a campaign does. And so for those of us who started after Biden won, we were already dealing with a couple of things. We were dealing with heavy suppression. There was suppression before, but it increased over time. So for people who started during Bernie, like 2016, they didn't have to deal with the level of suppression that we have to deal with today. Some of you have told me this yourself. After you watch my show, you're recommended CNN or you're recommended MSNBC. Why? I'm not mainstream media. That didn't used to be the case. You used to be recommended another independent network. That doesn't happen anymore. So they pushed independent media down in the algorithm and they pushed corporate media up in the algorithm. So when there is a presidential campaign, and particularly someone as popular as Bernie Sanders was, if you were around during that time, you grew very quickly. And with that growth of having hundreds and thousands of subscribers, there's a lot of money to be made there. And this is why I say we always have to bring it back to the money. After Biden won in 2020, things started to change. You did not have Donald Trump there to give you more views. Trump was also very popular for mainstream media as well. He helped their ratings. So they also took a turn for the worse when Trump lost in 2020. Bernie Sanders was most likely not going to run again. And then on top of that, the squad had already proven to be a big disappointment. So if you were a part of that group during that time, where do you go and what do you do? Last year for you was probably a difficult year. You may have found yourself trying to defend Joe Biden in instances where he did not deserve to be defended, just so you can play with the algorithm. And that's what people have to understand. A lot of this boils down to money. A lot of it is not just about growth. It's about creating some type of wealth here. And it's also about something else that I'm going to mention that I don't think he mentions this in this clip, but I'm going to add on as well, because it's actually not just about money. Let me go on.
That you wouldn't find on cable TV or in mainstream newspapers, magazines, right? And so on. But presidential campaigns come with the unique benefit of more or less writing themselves, right? They provide that narrative arc, which makes the day-to-day duties of online commentators far easier than having to sort through dozens of different stories and research them and choose, okay, which one should we cover? Which one should we not cover?
This is the part I told you guys before as well, is that that's the hardest part for me. It's not finding stories. It's deciding which stories I'm going to cover out of these 20 stories I found for one day. That's the hardest part. Then you have to look up the articles. Then you got to read the articles. Then you have to try to find clips that actually make sense and just doesn't sound like a bunch of gibberish. Like, those things actually take time. But if you're mainly focusing on a presidential campaign, that doesn't take as much work, because all you have to do is follow them through the process. So if there is a debate, all you got to do is talk about that debate. If this person has had an interview recently, all you have to do is talk about that interview. You don't have to sit there and pick out all these different news stories. And that does make a big difference, and you will grow faster. I'm glad he mentioned that, because I think sometimes people think that we just jump on camera and there's not much to it. It takes time. It takes time to pick stories. It takes time to read all those articles. I usually read them twice sometimes. Like, it takes time to research the information.
How are we going to approach these topics, right? Elections are these sort of simple, straightforward, good versus evil narratives in which one hero character, your candidate, must overcome all these obstacles, beat the odds, and defeat the villainous opposition. These are the kind of popcorn movies, if you will, that audiences crave. And when they're done well, they're almost always box office gold. And so now, as the 2024 primary season begins, many in the online left media space are, for the first time ever, faced with a very grim reality of a presidential campaign season with no candidate to support, which means the story has no hero character. There's no Rocky Balboa in the ring. There's no Atticus Finch in the courtroom. And any screenwriting teacher would tell you that a script with no hero is a certain dud. Now, there is no doubt in my mind that professional YouTubers who made their bones in 2016 are aware of this looming disaster in which a presidential election cycle is going to come and go without the massive boost in engagement, subscriptions, and donations that usually comes with it, and comes with championing a candidate and confirming the biases, various biases of their most avid supporters. Now, it is for this reason, and this reason only, in my honest to God opinion, that so many of these pundits are so desperately trying to sell their followers on Marianne Williamson's 20.
There you go. That part right there. Because you have to find someone to replace the Bernie strategy. Bernie did it twice in a row. You have to bring in someone else to keep that going. And that's just reality. Now, this is not to say that Marianne didn't want to run. This is not to say that Marianne doesn't want to be president. But this is to say that there is money to be made there. And so you have to find somebody to fill that Bernie spot. The problem is the person that was found is not popular the way that Bernie Sanders was. Bernie Sanders, till this day, as much as I have a lot of criticism about him, he's still the most popular senator in DC. He still has a lot of support. So, it's somewhat of a reach if the pick is someone like Marianne who does not garner that same type of support. So you already know that there's no way that Marianne is going to win. So if you already know that there's no way that Marianne is going to win, then why are you trying to sell this on to people? Because even if Marianne loses, she still wins. Even if Marianne loses, the people who are pushing her, who are pushing to do the strategy, those people still win. They still make money off of it. And they also get access. And we're going to talk about that in just a second.
24 challenge to Joe Biden. Because despite her non-existent polling support as of last week, and only 4% polling support this week after being proposed by Morning Consult as the sole alternative to Joe Biden, many in the progressive media are pitching Marianne's campaign as a sort of blockbuster threequel to the two Bernie Sanders efforts in hopes of recreating that same magic, that same spike in viewership that came with the first two Sanders campaigns. Now, at first glance, this seems like a sort of more or less rational business proposition, albeit, I think, a very shallow and cynical one. But the more you think about it, the problem they're going to have is that by the third time around, and you can already see they're starting to have this problem, many in this space have already come to know how this particular movie ends, with dashed hopes, deflating defeat, and a reluctant, exasperated, blue no matter who endorsement from the candidate, which then fractures their coalition.
That is 100% correct. And even if it wasn't Marianne Williamson, anyone else put in this position doing that strategy would run into the same issues. He is correct when he says that there is money to be made there. People will grow. People will, just like before, like some people are probably going to reach over 1 million subscribers. But who will lose? The working class people will lose. I made a decision after Bernie 2020 and after the squad's failures that I was not going to tell working class people or any people to donate their money to candidates running in the two-party system. Not anyone. And we've received a lot of criticism for that. Those of us at RBN, people are really angry with us. You know, we were saying this last year, and some of the same people who agreed with us when we said this last year, now that it's getting closer to 2024 and people are starting to announce a run, now some of those people are starting to turn and they're really angry with us, including some of the ones who have been on this show. And this is why I'm preparing you now. 2024, watch, next year is going to be even worse because people are starting to show their true colors. Now, we need to go back and we need to look at where this all came from to begin with. And we have to go back to TYT. TYT is where this really all started. And I want to show you some of the channels that you may not have been aware of that were a part of TYT, but are no longer affiliated. So they mentioned the TYT network. We know who they are right now. And then it goes into programs produced for the TYT network that are no longer in production. They mentioned those. Remember aggressive progressives. Programs no longer produced or owned by the TYT network, but are still in production. This is the piece I want to focus on right here. The Rubin report, remember Dave Rubin left. David Pakman, and a lot of people don't know this. David Pakman was also a part of the TYT network. From 2005, he was affiliated with the TYT network from 2012 to 2015. We all know Jimmy Dore started with TYT. The Majority Report was also a part of TYT. Believe it or not, even the Breakfast Club, a lot of people don't know this, was also a part of TYT. That's with Charlemagne the God. And also Secular Talk, which was Kyle Kalinski's show. The reason why I'm showing you this is because when you look at this whole progressive movement, it's almost impossible, with the exception of those of us who started recently, it's almost impossible to find people that at some time or place were not connected to TYT back then. Why is that important for you to understand? Because it explains some of the talking points that they have even today. This also can tell you why we received criticism about our General Strike Summit, where some people told us we did not go through the proper channels. What were they referring to? They were referring to that TYT network umbrella, that the ideas should start with them first, or should be ran through them first, and then you move on and do what you want to do. We did not do it that way. And that bothered some people. Now, if you'll notice, out of all these people that were affiliated with TYT and no longer are, Jimmy Dore is the only one that still advocated for the progressive strategy after he left TYT, because Dave Rubin didn't. Dave Rubin's flipped completely. But woke up and said, no, this is a sham. The progressives aren't fighting for you. We can't do this. He's the only one that broke away, like really broke away. Secular Talk still supports it. Majority Report, like they still are doing that strategy. Jimmy Dore is the only one that completely broke away 100%. And that will let you understand one of the reasons why they have problems with Jimmy Dore. Now, this is not to say that Jimmy Dore is perfect, but I think we all know what's really going on here. Now, why do I bring this up? One of the things that Keaton mentioned in that video, he talked about the money, a lot of money to be made when you have that presidential campaign, but also especially when you have access to that candidate. That is very important for people to understand. If you have access to Marianne Williamson in a sense, like others do, and I've interviewed Marianne, but I'm not on board with her campaign. But when you are on board with that and you do have that type of access, that means you can get access to other politicians in DC that you may have not been able to get access to before. That means you might be able to interview members of the squad. And if you are a channel that has started this network where you said you're going to be a new mainstream and you're going to be a serious competitor, eventually it will get to the point where you will need to have access to politicians in DC. This is inevitable. So it's not just because people believe in Marianne. It's not just because people believe Joe Biden should be primary challenge. It's also because of money, and it's also because of access. And you have to understand that is very important. If you are trying to get to a TYT level, you are going to have access to politicians. And for the most part, the progressives or the squad members are not interviewing with independent media for the most part. They are not going on to Secular Talk, some of these same shows that championed for them and told people to donate to them and started the Justice Democrat strategy. They are ignoring those shows. So it's almost like you have to get back in good graces with them in order to get them on your show again. So we have to go back to the Justice Democrat launch. Now, this was, I just want to remind you, this was Humanist Report. This was 6 years ago. There's something here that is said that I want to point out, because it's not just about the presidential candidates. It's also about Justice Democrats, which also came in after Bernie 2016. This was another way to also make money. And that's not to say they didn't believe in these candidates. A lot of us believed in these candidates. But what you have to understand is there was also something in it for the people who started it. Listen to the launch, listen to the announcement, because there's something I want to highlight here.
The Young Turks and Kyle Kulinski of Secular Talk have teamed up with veterans of Bernie Sanders' campaign to launch a new initiative to take over the Democratic Party once and for all. So it's called Justice Democrats, and this is something that I am overwhelmingly excited about. Now, the first question, before we even get to what Justice Democrats are, is why even bother with the Democratic Party? Because I talk about how the Democratic Party is a lost cause and how they're rotten to the core, so why not just start a new party? Why not take all of the resources that Justice Democrats can raise and funnel this towards creating a brand new party that we're in control of? Well, I'll let Kyle Kulinski explain why that might not be the best strategy.
And all of the institutional...
So now they're going to point out why they're not trying to create a third party. But there's another piece to this. Listen to this.
biases against third parties are so immensely strong that we're effectively handicapping ourselves if we go into it trying to do a third party. It's like taking a sledgehammer, swinging it at your kneecap, and then saying, okay, now it's time to go run that marathon you spoke about. Well, if I'm going to run the marathon, I should be in tip-top shape now, shouldn't I? I should give myself the best possible chance, not the worst chance. So, for example, the Green Party, who I absolutely love, they've had some successes here and there, but by and large, they are not what's viewed as a viable third party. And again, it's not their fault. It's the fault of the institutional biases against them and against third parties in general.
Notice here how they mention the Green Party is not viable, but they're talking about on a national level. Notice how they leave out the fact that the Green Party actually has won on the local level. In fact, there's a lot of them that have won on the local level, but they didn't tell us that back then. This is something that would have been good to know. And even when you look at the strategy was to focus on the national level, not what you can get accomplished locally. This is also something that I feel like people should have known back then. But listen to the rest of it, because there's something that's mentioned here by Mike that I think some people may not have heard.
But if you're a member of the Green Party and you're a member of the Democratic Socialists, Let me tell you right now, you are our allies. I view you as our allies. So I don't want people to take it the wrong way. I need them to understand exactly where we're coming from. And if you read the platform of the Justice Democrats, we specifically refer to reforms that we favor that would help third parties and remove some of those institutional biases. But based on our calculations...
Did you hear that part right there? Reforms that would help third parties. That never happened. And you know why that never happened? Because it's not profitable. I'm sorry, but we have to call it out. We have to call it for what it is. Third parties are not profitable. Independent candidates are not profitable unless you have someone running that's like a celebrity type figure. Like if you had a Jesse Ventura that was running on a national level. And I'm going to point out their principles as well. You're going to see this in their principles, where this was one of the things that Justice Democrats was supposed to do. And that never happened. So people were stuck and trapped in the Democratic Party.
Our highest chance of winning and actually getting the policies we want implemented is to take over the Democratic Party.
So in my opinion, I think Kyle's logic here is absolutely sound. And I've kind of made similar arguments here. I've stated that, yes, unfortunately, we have to begrudgingly work within the Democratic Party, but simultaneously try to build a viable third-party alternative, because...
That part right there. Simultaneously build a third-party alternative. That never happened. In fact, all of the focus and investment was in the Justice Democrats and that progressive strategy. It was Bernie Sanders and the Justice Democrats, because again, like I said, there's no money. It's not lucrative for you to try to do a third party movement. It's just not. But there was a lot of money to be made in Bernie Sanders' campaign. There was a lot of money to be made with this Justice Democrat strategy. Like I said, these two issues alone helped these platforms grow very quickly, and there was a lot of money that was made. So just like that, the third party part of this experiment, forget about it. We're not even going to try to implement it because the money's right here. I'll let him finish this bit and then I'll show you something else in reference to this.
Unfortunately, with our two-party system, with our single-member district plurality, winner-take-all system, it's really difficult for a third party to gain prominence in the United States currently. So I agree that it's easier to just try to take over the Democratic Party rather than trying to create a viable alternative. Now, I think that we should still try to build up the Green Party at the same time, but
build up the Green Party at the same time. And this, again, this never happened at all. So that being said, I want to show you what the principles actually were for Justice Democrats, because some people have seen this, some people have not. But I think it's important that you understand that that actually was one of the principles. This isn't just Mike's opinion. This was actually listed here. When you look at ideology and political issues, let's scroll down to the bullet points. Now, some of these I've already called out. That doesn't even happen. Ending arms sales to countries that violate human rights, such as Saudi Arabia, Israel, Egypt. They ain't been supporting that. There's a lot of these they have not done. They haven't done at all. Ending the practice of unilaterally waging war. But I want to get to the piece here where it talks about third party. Let me make sure I don't pass it, because I think here it is. Right here. Let me highlight this. Is it going to let me highlight it? Implementing instant runoff voting nationwide in an effort to make third party and independent candidates more viable. Implementing instant runoff voting nationwide in an effort to make third party and independent candidates more viable. That never happened. And that's why we don't have that third party movement. That's why the Green Party was not built up. That's why you got people like Howie Hawkins still around there. And this is why people got funneled back into the Democratic Party and they were told, just go ahead and vote for Hillary Clinton. Just go ahead and vote for Joe Biden. So that piece there is crucial. Had that piece been implemented, maybe we would have a candidate ready and prepared to run for a third party run for president or an independent run for president. But we never got there. And so now some of the same people that I just showed you that say it's stupid to even try third party, they weren't saying that then. And they're not telling you that this was a part of the strategy. It was just never implemented. So that's important to understand. So we move on to Bernie Sanders, Bernie 2016 run. Bernie Sanders was doing pretty well. Of course, he was cheated. And even though that happened, what did Bernie Sanders tell you to do? Let's take a look at it.
Immediately, right now, we have got to defeat Donald Trump. And we have got to elect Hillary Clinton and Tim Kaine.
Boo. Do you see that? That is when Bernie Sanders told people to go ahead and vote for Hillary Clinton, and people are booing him. Now, that was the first time Bernie said to vote for his opponent. Again, funneling people back into the Democratic Party, telling people to vote for the same corrupt corporate establishment that he told them to fight against. And this has been a common tale where the progressive candidate runs, they lose, and they tell you to go ahead and vote for the corporate candidate. So Bernie Sanders had a lot of energy. He had a lot of people riled up and ready to fight and push back. And he took all of that energy and channeled it right back into the Democratic Party. That was the first time. People who did not want to vote for Hillary Clinton were shamed for supporting people like Jill Stein or for not voting at all. Those people were shamed. Those people were bullied. Those people were told that they're the reason why Trump won. And even when you do the math, that is not the case. Because if you do the math and you look at the votes that Jill Stein got, even if Hillary Clinton got her votes, Hillary Clinton still would have lost. Hillary Clinton lost on her own because she did not campaign in the Rust Belt. She didn't think those people were important. She thought she was a shoo-in. She thought she had it in the bag because she was backed by people like Goldman Sachs. So when you had people like Breonna Joy Gray who voted for Jill Stein, when you had people like that, again, those people were shamed. They were like, how dare you not support her? And the one common thing that both of these elections had in common is the fact that the common enemy was Donald Trump. And so they told you time and time again to vote for the corporate Democrat, even though that's not someone that has the same principles as you. But they told you to do it anyway, because otherwise you'll end up with Donald Trump. Well, Donald Trump beat Hillary Clinton. And then once Trump had been in office, then we were brought with that same fear again. 2020 comes around and Bernie Sanders runs against over 20 candidates for the Democrat primary. It comes down to Biden and Bernie Sanders. And I've talked about this before, where I felt like during that one-on-one debate that he had with Joe Biden, I do not feel like Bernie went as hard at Joe Biden as he could have. And you can do that just by going after his record heavily. And it almost said something to me as to though, like, it looks like Bernie's just given up here and has been told to let Joe just go ahead and be the nominee. Bernie Sanders told people to support Joe Biden before he even announced that he was dropping out of the race. And then not only that, but he also did this on CNN. So here we have Bernie Sanders again telling you to vote for his opponent. Listen to this.
This election is the most important in the modern history of this country. In response to the unprecedented crises we face, we need an unprecedented response, a movement like never before of people who are prepared to stand up and fight for democracy and decency and against greed, oligarchy, and bigotry.
To fight against corporate greed and oligarchy and bigotry. But then who does he tell you to go ahead and vote for?
And we need Joe Biden as our next president. Let me take this opportunity to say a word to the millions of people who supported my campaign this year and in 2016. My friends, thank you for your trust, your support, and the love you showed Jane, me, and our family. Together, we have moved this country in a bold new direction, showing that all of us, black and white, Latino, Native American, Asian American, gay and straight, native-born and immigrant, yearn for a nation based on the principles of justice, love, and compassion. Our campaign ended several months ago, but our movement continues. And
it didn't. The movement did not continue. Here's where the problem lies. After Bernie Sanders lost in 2020, and by the way, his best shot was 2020, not 2016. Based on the numbers, his best shot was 2020. After he lost in 2020, even though he said our movement continues, Bernie Sanders publicly was simping for Joe Biden, saying that Joe Biden's doing a great job. Bernie Sanders had interviews with corporate media. He also interviewed with Crystal Ball and said that Joe Biden is doing a great job. Bernie Sanders abandoned his movement. So that was twice now that Bernie Sanders took that same energy and funneled it back into the Democratic Party. And so now all of the shows that were able to benefit off of the Bernie campaigns and the Justice Democrat strategy with the squad, they were kind of at a crossroad as to what do we do now? Because that's twice that Bernie has disappointed people and the squad has also disappointed people. They're not willing to push back. They're voting against legislation and voting for legislation that they're not supposed to based on the Justice Democrat principles. What do we do? And that's why you have to understand the push for Marianne is important to those people, not just because they think Joe Biden should be primaried, but because how do you keep this progressive energy moving if you don't have that person to run as the progressive candidate for president? If you don't have anyone to do it, the energy will go away. Now, there was one person who was not willing to budge. There was one person who said, this is ridiculous. They have sold out, they're frauds, and I'm not doing this anymore. But a couple of years ago, there were two people who were saying that, particularly on this interview here. One of them stood by their word. The other one did not. Now, this is Mike Figueredo with Jimmy Dore This video was posted 5 years ago. Will progressives ever vote for Democrats again? Listen to this.
Perez and his bullshit warmed over corporatist agenda, which just got the Democratic Party wiped out from coast to coast. That's not happening. I'm not going to support a corporatist Democrat because Bernie Sanders stands next to him. In fact, Bernie Sanders told us a year ago that we shouldn't listen to him. That's what Bernie Sanders said. So how do you feel about this unity tour with the Democrats?
Yeah, if Bernie Sanders does something, I try to give him the benefit of the doubt more so than other politicians, but there's absolutely no way I can rationalize this because Bernie Sanders has repeatedly lambasted Democrats. He said they need to reform X, they need to reform Y, Z, but he's decided to imply that we should unify behind the Democratic Party before they've done anything to reform. And in fact, they just gave us the middle finger. They voted down a ban on lobbyist contributions the same day that Tom Perez became the new DNC chair. So they've done nothing to show to us that they are willing to embrace progressive reforms. And we see a couple of articles in Politico and The Hill about how, Dems are embracing Bernie now. That sounds great. Let's see it. I want to actually see some action. I don't want to hear about how they're embracing Bernie Sanders, because here's how it looks to me. They continue to trot out progressives like Keith Ellison, who, progressives already have some problems with him, but he's better than Tom Perez. We'll put it that way. They trot out Keith Ellison. They drag Bernie Sanders.
We'll pause there. There's another segment I want to get to as well in this video. This took place after Bernie lost to Hillary. Now, there's another piece here I want to go ahead and show you on that video as well. Eric, can you get it to that second timestamp? There's another piece I want to show you as well, because this is very, very revealing, very telling. How many people back then were ready to say, let's just walk away from the Democratic Party altogether? But you got to remember, the Humanist Report is a part of that TYT network. So even though he may have felt that way, doesn't mean the bosses felt that way. Do you see where I'm going with this? So the thing is this, the same person who has said some pretty nasty things to me on Twitter, then blocked me, and he blocks a lot of people, then blocked me for saying the same thing that he said back then. It is very telling what is happening here. Now, listen to this part here. Will you support them?
Fucking thing. So I have no idea what he thinks he's doing or what's going on, but if he doesn't leave the Democratic Party and do that draft Bernie Nick Brana thing, it's the Democrat, it's done. They're a dead fucking party. They are a dead party. Do you agree with that when I say that they're a dead party?
Oh, absolutely. And here's the thing I want to mention.
Oh, absolutely. No hesitancy at all. Not hesitant at all. Oh, absolutely. Notice Jimmy was still the same. The same way Jimmy was talking right there, the same way Jimmy talked today. Notice he was still the same.
That the draft Bernie thing, because people, they kind of give me some pushback and they say, Mike, it's not going to happen. Here's the thing about that. Are the odds stacked against, a People's Party led by Bernie? Of course it is, but that's not the point. The point is that we have leverage, that Bernie Sanders has leverage. So he says, look, you see these millions of people, they're leaving the Democratic Party. They're joining my party now. Either you change or my party takes over. And this is what made Donald Trump successful in the Republican Party as an anti-establishment candidate. When it seemed as though the RNC and, Republican establishment people were trying to do shenanigans, what did Donald Trump do? He said, if you do this, I will be running as an independent and you lose. If Bernie Sanders did that, I think the DNC would have been less inclined to just brazenly rig the primary against him. So I want Bernie Sanders to have leverage. And by going on this unity tour, he's kind of putting up the white flag and is saying, you know what, I get it, Democrats, I have to surrender because you're the only chance we got. You're the opposition to Donald Trump. And that's true. They're the opposition party. We have no choice, so I surrender. That's what it feels like, and it's not a strategy when progressives desperately need leverage right now. We desperately need it.
Well, what?
Okay, let's pause here for just a second. So, someone changed. People were definitely bolder back then. Now, this gets to the point on the thumbnail where there's that split and you see Jimmy on the other side, because Jimmy didn't back down. When Jimmy said, that's it, I'm not supporting them anymore, he stopped supporting them. He actually did it. Whereas others said, yeah, we should, no way, this is ridiculous. No, I wouldn't do that. But they still decided to do it anyway. And this is the reason why I think a lot of them have issues with Jimmy Dore, because Jimmy Dore actually did what he said he was going to do. They did not. Because he was able to see the writing on the wall. He was able to see, like, look, they are frauds. They're not going to change anything. It is what it is. So that's part of it. But then there was force the vote. And we have to remember what happened here. This is when I think the rest of them that hadn't split from Jimmy by that time decided to split from Jimmy, when he called them out, when he called them the fraud squad. Because you see, the thing about the strategy is that they're totally fine with you if you call out Republicans. They're totally fine with you if you call out corporate Democrats. And even a little hesitant there in some ways, because some of them have defended Joe Biden where he should not have been defended at all. But the moment you criticize the so-called progressives, squad members, or Bernie Sanders, the moment you come after one of their own, then they see you as a problem. And Jimmy Dore was the first one to do it.
I'm sorry, but there's no excuse for the left not to have organized in the last few years to mount a challenge to Nancy Pelosi. You know she's hostile to you and your goals, and she has a 28% approval rating. She's less popular than Trump by far. What the F were you doing this entire time? I'll tell you what they were doing, Kyle. Nothing. They weren't doing anything. It was obvious they weren't doing anything. They weren't doing anything until a pothead comedian decided to bring it up a month before the speakership election.
Let's pause there about them not doing anything. Again, this is what I'm trying to tell you. He was the first one to really call them out, and he did so, in an emotional way, which honestly, I don't blame him. I think some of us were really pissed that they weren't willing to do that, because that was a strategy from Democratic Socialists of America, and they weren't willing to do it. This right here was the breaking point for some people, because he decided to call them what they really were, which were frauds, and has been proven to be true. So do you see what I'm saying? This was the big split. Now, what does that have to do with this campaign strategy? If all of the large networks are not on board for progressive candidates, that not only can hurt the candidates, that hurts the entire strategy, that hurts the entire so-called movement, and it also hurts some of the channels that are telling you to do it. And then that hurts money. This is very important for people to understand. Keaton is 100% correct when he tells you how they grew because of Bernie Sanders, because of the squad. He's 100% correct. And if you are a network that is trying to be the next TYT or better than TYT, there's no doubt about it. At some point or another, you are going to have to interview politicians in DC. And that means that you need access. And if you tell your viewers not to support them, not to donate them, they'll still criticize them a little bit, but not to the point where they'll be blocked. If you tell that to your viewers, then you damn sure as well aren't going to get any kind of access to those politicians. Jimmy Dore obviously doesn't care to have that access to those politicians, but some people do. And that's what this is all about. So there were a couple of things that happened. There was force the vote. There was the Bernie campaigns where Bernie told you to go right back into the DNC. And then there were those that were bold enough to stand up and say, no, I'm not voting for Joe Biden in 2020. And one of those people was Brianna Joy Gray, and she was shamed for doing it. She was shamed for saying that. And she was shamed by one of their own, which was David Pakman. This is what happens when you don't follow the script. When you don't get on board with everybody else and they tell you, yes, you got to go ahead and vote for Joe Biden so we don't get Trump again. Then they turn on each other. Listen to this.
Controversy from the same interview with the Associated Press is that Bernie is being accused by some of attacking his own supporters because he sort of distanced himself from a woman named Brianna Joy Gray, who was his press secretary at one point in time. She posted on Twitter, quote, "With the utmost respect for Bernie Sanders, who is an incredible human being and a genuine inspiration, I don't endorse Joe Biden. I supported Bernie because he backed ideas like Medicare for all, canceling all student debt, and a wealth tax. Biden supports none of those." To me, this is just the epitome of a misguided comment because, okay, Biden's not for Medicare for all, but he wants to expand it to 60 plus, which would give it to 20 million more people. Trump wants to kick 32 million people off of health insurance. Joe Biden just put out a plan for partial cancellation of some student debt. Trump, now is being forced into suspending some payments because of coronavirus, but Biden's better than Trump on that. On the wealth tax, okay, Biden doesn't support Warren or Bernie's wealth tax, but Biden's tax plan and capital gains taxing plan is way better than Donald Trump. So to me,
didn't Joe Biden continue some of Trump's tax policies? In reference to the healthcare comment, does everybody have healthcare yet? Where is that? Where is that healthcare expansion that he is referring to? So do you see how he said her comment was misguided? Because see, this is what happens. Bernie Sanders lost. You got to vote for Joe Biden because he's still a Democrat. No, he's not Bernie, but at least it's the Democratic Party. And this is how they keep the cycle going. And anyone who split away from it and refuses to stay on course is shamed, is smeared, is ridiculed. And that's what they've done to Jimmy Dore. That's what they've done to us at RBN. I saw your comment here. She's black. This is why they hate RBN. Keep up the good work, RBN. Exactly. This is why they come after us. This is why people still come after Bree, even though she's on board for Marianne. They still come after her because she talks to both sides. Like she has voted for a Green Party. She's voted for Jill Stein. She was Bernie Sanders' press secretary. She has found a way to find some middle ground and she talks to people on both sides. So they still smear her too. But do you see how this goes nowhere? This gets you nowhere. I'll let him finish and then I'll get you to the current problem that we have right now.
This is, missing the forest for the trees. But in any case, Bernie was asked about the comments from Brianna Joy Gray. And he did a sort of Brianna who kind of thing, telling the Associated Press simply, "She is my former press secretary, not on the payroll."
Go back to this part. I remember this. This was the comment from Bernie Sanders. So you see how he just turned on her like that? You see how he just turned on Bree like that? She is my former press secretary, not on the payroll. I remember when this happened. It's not like Bree said she wasn't going to vote for Bernie. She said she wasn't going to vote for Joe Biden. Why was Bernie so ticked off by that? Because Bernie Sanders was still operating for the same Democratic Party that he told you to be wary of. That's why. See how they do you? Now it leads us to where we are today with the issue with Marianne Williamson. And again, like I said, I've interviewed Marianne on the show before. But this issue right here in particular, they are going to ask Marianne if she will support Joe Biden. This goes back to the same issue with Bernie Sanders twice in a row when he told you he'd support Hillary, he'd support Biden, and he told you to do the same. So they're asking Marianne the same question. Listen to this.
So you're headed to South Carolina tonight. You'll be doing events tomorrow. Later this month, you're going to be meeting with the South Carolina Democratic Party Black Caucus. How do you feel about the primary schedule change, and how do you plan to connect with Black South Carolina voters who will be instrumental in how far you get? I mean, it was South Carolina Democratic primary voters who made Joe Biden president of the United States.
Indeed. So there are two questions that you've asked there. First has to do with the obvious rigging of this primary schedule. The DNC theoretically is supposed to stay neutral until a nominee has already been chosen.
So this is one of the problems that you run into, and Bernie Sanders ran into the same issue, that the DNC is not going to be fair to any progressive candidate. And this is just a fact of the matter. It's happened multiple times to Bernie Sanders. They're now doing it, although Joe Biden had already made this decision before Marianne announced that she was running. And I hear there are others that may be announcing as well. But you are in a system that is not designed to help you thrive, and is damn sure not designed to help you actually win. And that is on purpose. And so to that, I tell people there is no need to give money again. Like, campaigns do cost money, but we already know the end of the story. We know the ending. We don't have to even watch the trailer. We know exactly how this movie ends and what is going to happen again then. So they're already doing it. This is what I said before. They already made South Carolina the first state. They have changed the rules in a way that makes it easier for Biden. So it's not just about Marianne. It's anybody else who steps into that position. They are going to come up against these same challenges. Let's go on.
But what happened here was a deliberate effort. They're not even covert about it anymore. They're very overt about it. Let's get rid of New Hampshire, since, as we know, New Hampshire did not do, Joe Biden did not do well in New Hampshire. New Hampshireites like progressive and independent candidates. So we get rid of New Hampshire. All this about diversity, when really, if it was just about diversity, we'd be putting Georgia in there. We'd be putting Michigan in there. Well, and we know that he does well in South Carolina. So the American people see this. The American people see this, Jonathan. The hypocrisy is unbelievable.
Oh, but come on. But the DNC has proposed, part of the new plan is putting Georgia into the primary schedule and twinning it with New Hampshire. So that criticism doesn't quite.
Yeah, but they're not putting Georgia first, though. They're putting South Carolina first. And that is the state that helped Joe Biden win. Like, his analysis is poor.
No, because they're still talking about poor diversity making South Carolina first. Now, South Carolina is an important state in the primary season, so I'm not denying that. But to say that this has nothing to do with the James Clyburn machinery, it has nothing to do with Jamie Harrison, these are ways that the larger democratic process is being stymied. This is not 100 years ago when men get to sit around a table smoking cigars deciding who the nominee will be.
Okay.
But it is. And see, this is another part of the problem. It actually is. That is exactly what they do. Like, it still happens.
We've got less than a minute left, and I want to squeeze in two more questions.
I thought we were going to talk about black people in South Carolina.
Well, we were just a minute ago, but okay. So you're running against a sitting president, which is a daunting task.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there are a lot of people out there who are thinking, what's she going to do if she's not successful? Will you support the Democratic nominee? Will you support the party if you are not the nominee?
I'm going to do everything possible as a patriotic American to make sure that the neo-fascist authoritarian threat that is very real in our country and is very entrenched at this point within the Republican Party does not win the White House in 2024. That's why I'm running. I do not believe that the offering of an agenda where basically the message is the economy is doing well will beat the Democrats in 2024. So I think it's the question is reversed. How are we going to win the presidency in 2024? We are going to offer to the American people genuine economic reform and not just helping you survive what is essentially an unjust system. That's why I'm running.
So that is a yes. When they run for office, they have to pledge whether or not they will support the other candidate. They have to pledge that. Bernie Sanders made that pledge to support Hillary Clinton at the very beginning of his campaign. I didn't find that out until like last year. But if I knew that at that time, I would have never donated money to Bernie Sanders. They have to make a pledge. So here we are again, where no yes, no, no. You have to go in full force here. You cannot give a roundabout answer to the question. It's a yes or no. Are you going to support Joe Biden? If someone were to ask me that question, I'd say no. That's simple. That's simple. So to me, that means yes. And that means we have a Bernie Sanders pattern again, where the progressive candidate runs and then they tell you to endorse the corporate candidate, the corporate people that they told you to fight against. And the cycle continues. And then the next 2 years, another set of progressives will run for Congress, and then they'll be endorsed and pushed up by the same people. And then the 2 years after that, let's see who else we can get to run as a progressive for president, and then they'll be endorsed. And it is a constant machine. So you have to understand that at the end of the day, all of this is about money and it's about access. Because you make a lot more money backing presidential campaigns than you do doing what I do. There's not as much money to be made for me to tell you to leave both parties. Just keeping it real. There's not as much money to be made for me to tell you to support mutual aid, to support direct action, for me to tell you go participate in workers' strike back. There's not much money in that. I was just at workers' strike back yesterday. Good turnout. Those videos should post tomorrow. But that's what it's about, you guys. Let's be real. It is not lucrative to push third-party candidates. It is not lucrative to push independent candidates. It is not lucrative to tell people to do mutual aid, to tell people to do direct action. Those things don't make money. And that's what this is all about at the end of the day. And if people don't like it, that's fine. You don't have to like what I'm saying here, but I'm being 100% honest with you. If there was no money involved, it wouldn't be done. And when this is all over and Marianne loses and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. says he's got an exploratory committee as well, so he may also run. When all these people lose, if Joe Biden runs, at the end of the day, they still win because they get to write books, they get more speaking engagements. When all of these people lose, trying to do this progressive strategy, all of the hosts that tell you to support them and to get on board with them, they also win because it helps them grow again significantly. Maybe not as much as Bernie did, but it helps them grow again significantly, and it helps them make a lot of money. And that's what this is all about at the end of the day. I'm sorry, but I'm not here to sugarcoat things for you. I'm not here to tell you things that are going to give you warm, bubbly feelings. I'm here to cut right through it. Cut right through the BS and just give you the facts. If there was no money to be made, it would not be happening. Period.